Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Championship Showcase, Secrets for Success, from the playing field of competition to the field of life. We have been speaking with inspirational sports leaders, former athletes, coaches, administrators, and related professionals who are sharing their life strategies and empowering messages of hope and purpose to support those athletes that are seeking to make a successful transition from the playing field of competition to the field of life. My name is Dominic Militello, and we're so glad you could join us. We're fortunate to have a Super Bowl champion with us today, so let's jump right in. Today we're speaking with the remarkable Aaron Taylor. Aaron was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the first round, 16th overall pick of the NFL draft, and was a member of the Packers Super Bowl championship team where he raised the Lombardi Trophy. Aaron played and started in 75 NFL games during his 4-year professional career for both Green Bay and the San Diego Chargers. Aaron was drafted out of the University of Notre Dame, where he was an offensive lineman. He won the Lombardi Award, Jim Parker Award, and was unanimous first-team All-American selection as an offensive tackle. He earned a bachelor's degree in sociology from Notre Dame, and he played high school football for De La Salle High School in Concord, California, where he was named to the USA Today High School All-American team. Today, Aaron works for CBS Sports Network as a game and studio analyst. We're lucky to have Aaron Taylor with us today. Aaron, welcome to the Championship Showcase.
Oh, Dominic, it's good to be here, man. I assure you that.
Well, we know that you're very busy, and we really appreciate you spending time with us today, Aaron. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on our topic today of athletes transitioning away from sports and into the real world. But before we get to that, will you give our listeners some background and tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, I grew up as an only child in a single-parent household. Parents got divorced when I was 2, so it was kind of my mother and I had a half-sister that lived with us early on, and we were living in Oakland, and it was a little bit rough living on West MacArthur Boulevard. So we ended up getting up out of there and moving to the suburbs, where it was a little safer in the East Bay. But I was a kid that moved around a lot, man. Every 2 years, for one reason or another, I was the new kid in school and always having to make new friends, and that got to be challenging over the years. So as I got older, I started hanging out with the wrong crowds and kind of quickly became a DNF student. And I was a kid that didn't have any purpose, didn't have any leadership skills. It was much more of a follower than I was a leader, even though I think early on I probably had some leadership skills that, my mother likes to tell. But the long and the short of it was, after getting kicked out of the house because I'd snuck out all night drinking and partying with some friends, I kind of had my come to Jesus moment, if you will. And my mother kind of worked me back from what is it that I wanted to do with my life. And what I came out with was I wanted to play pro football. And I really didn't know if I wanted to do that. It just sounded good. But the reality was I wasn't making the choices and the corresponding actions to get the results that I wanted. So I had to start making different choices. And very shortly after that, I saw a special on TV about De La Salle High School and this 44-game win streak that they had. And she contacted the school. And from there, it was over, man. The harder I worked, the better I got. And I finally ended up being in an environment that believed in me, but more importantly, I could believe in something. And the results were miraculous, really. I went from a DNF student to an A and B student, and Coach Lattiser brought me in after my junior season and said, man, you have a chance to be a really good college athlete, and at the very least, have your college paid for. But these are the things I need you to do. And he challenged me to lift weights harder and lose some weight, and I did that. And the result was, by the time I got to be a senior, like a lot of guys nowadays, I had the opportunity to go to any college I wanted to in the country pretty much, and I chose Notre Dame for a variety of reasons. But it just goes to show you the power of sports and how meaningful the game of football was to me, but also the role that mentors and leaders and coaches can have in your lives and really help and determine the course about what your future holds.
Sure. And you mentioned, hard work was the catalyst. A lot of people hear hard work and say, oh, man, I don't want to do that. Why? What was it about the challenge or the hard work that put you back on track?
I don't think I had a choice, man. Those dudes were going to let me sell myself short. And that was the thing. When I got to De La Salle, my work ethic was terrible. I was doing the least I could to get by. because that wasn't my goal, wasn't to achieve greatness or success. Or I think now as a 42-year-old adult and an employee and a husband and a father, I just want to put my head on the pillow and feel good that I gave my all and gave my best, and leave the results up to somebody else. We all want to win, and in our own ways, however we measure that, but there's no shortcuts. That the only way to success, and that has been demonstrated over and over and over from my perspective, is to work your tail off. And I learned that at De La Salle for the first time, running around the track in that 95-degree heat and doing things that I never thought capable of. And there were coaches, the ones that demanded that. They set the bar for me. My job was to work towards that bar until I learned how to set my own bar high, and that's what I've done ever since.
Well, and I know Coach Ladd and the staff over there has an accountability type of program that's woven into the program. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Accountability is what it's all about. It's at the heart of team sports. I think you're out there doing your job, but it's within this context of many other people doing their job, and that's the great thing about the sport of football. It's the ultimate team game, and I happen to play a position that's the ultimate team position within the ultimate team game. Being an offensive lineman, where all five have to function as one, so there's inherent accountability there, but there's also outside accountability in the fact that the eye and the sky don't lie. There's no weaseling out whether or not you got your block, whether or not you caught the football or not, whether or not you made the tackle or not, whether or not as a quarterback you made the right read or not. It's right there, so it forced you to be accountable and to have that level of scrutiny, I think, that is very helpful moving forward. So I think Coach Ladisher and Terry Edson and the rest of the coaching staff did a beautiful job realizing that to build a good team, you have to have people that trust each other, that have people that are willing to own their mistakes, to put their hand up, to correct those mistakes and move forward. One of the things that I like to say in a variety of ways, depending on who I'm talking to, is to own it, forget it, or to own it, fix it, and to move on, to forget it. And I think that that's at the heart of what I learned at De La Salle was it's okay to make mistakes, but if you do, be responsible for them, fix them as soon as you can, and move forward. And when you do that, you tend to end up making fewer mistakes overall, which is the point.
Right. And just a little side note, Aaron, but obviously there's a success formula there at De La Salle. Why do you think more coaches around the country are not implementing that type of philosophy?
Habit. I think that there's a mentality that football is this macho, tough, violent sport, and it is. But it's also teamwork. There's a compassion element, believe it or not, in terms of being supportive and encouraging guys. That good coaches are good teachers, and I think what really set De La Salle apart was not that they worked hard, because everybody was working hard, but it was the process. It was the chapel services that we had and the dinners that we had at one of the players' houses that rotated throughout the season, where we talked about what our job was, what the team meant to us, what our teammates meant to us. So that in the fourth quarter, not only were we in good condition because we had run around the track like everybody else, but we were looking around in the huddle in the eyes of our teammates and the guys that we had, sat in chapel with and in church with and also run around the field with. And we knew that we could count on those guys. I'd swear on my children's lives I'm getting tingles right now as I'm saying this because it's still impactful. Football, man, in sports is a metaphor for life, right? And we all want to be a part of meaningful teams. It's hardwired into our DNA. And I think that Coach Ladisher and De La Salle understood that inherently, and they built strong communities. And the football was part of that community of the overall, LaSallian culture, if you will. And I think it was meaningful because we all knew we were part of something greater than ourselves. And I mean, that's the basis of every religion around the world if you really stop to think about it. So I think it tapped into some very visceral things for us. At least it did for me. And that's why I chose De La Salle, or that's why I chose De La Salle. It's also why I chose Notre Dame. I wanted to be a part of something greater than myself. I'm not a me guy or a guy that wants to achieve individual success. I'm always drawn towards things where I can be a meaningful part of the team. Not the most important part, but a part that matters. I want to do my job. I want to help people get better around me. And I think that De La Salle really modeled that for me extremely well. And I think that that's the secret to the sauce. Everybody works hard. Everybody lifts weights. But I think what sets that team apart is the core belief in how well they flex their team muscles and their accountability muscles and their trust muscles. And that oftentimes contradicts the macho version of sports that I think get promoted.
Wow. Well, I mean, the stuff that you're talking about just hits right home for me, and I think a lot of our listeners, Aaron, so thank you. And it sounds to me like De La Salle prepared you almost perfectly for what the general public feels and knows about Notre Dame. So tell us about your experience at Notre Dame.
Well, Tom Bowen was our athletic director at De La Salle when I was a senior, and he was a Notre Dame grad. And he started lobbying hard. Man, you got to take a trip to Notre Dame. You got to take a trip to Notre Dame. I didn't know where the heck it was, man. I thought it was in England somewhere. I think because I was confusing it with the church in France, man. I was all confused about this Notre Dame school way across the country. So all of my choices at that time were what was then the Pac-10. You know, it was Stanford, UCLA, Cal, Washington, USC, or this Notre Dame school. So finally I relented. I'm like, all right, Coach Bowen, man, I'll take a trip out to Notre Dame. And Bowie's now Memphis's AD and has done a great job with that. And his career has gone on well, but I'll always credit him for, you know, kind of motivating me and convincing me really to take that trip. Now, as it turns out, it happened to be the first trip that I took. And I think that that's an important part of this story because timing is often so important in the decisions that we make and you know, what we experience in our lives. So I take the trip, and I ride from the airport with this guy, Dean Lytle. Now, Dean was from North Carolina, and I'd never really met people from other parts of the country, certainly not from the South. And Dean was this cool cat, man, and we were talking, and we were both nervous and excited. It was both of our first recruiting trips, and he and I just kind of clicked. And then I met, you know, 3 or 4 other guys, and then Bryant Young and Jerome Bettis and Oliver Gibson. And there were all these guys that I ended up meeting that I really liked. Jeff Burris, I think, was on that first trip. Well, as it turns out, 20 of the 25 or 6 guys that signed that year with Notre Dame in that recruiting class were on that first trip, and we all got along instantly. It was a good group of dudes. And walking around the campus, there was something visceral in my bones that spoke to me about, man, this is a very good place to be. There's something unique or special about this place. And what I think I'm looking back is it reminded me of De La Salle.
Yeah.
And I mean, clearly, you know, both being, you know, Catholic institutions of higher learning, there's going to be some natural similarities there. But there was something bigger than just going there to play football. I also knew that they graduated at the time 97% of their football players. And I wasn't the best student in the world, but I knew I wasn't 3%. So that had a lot to do with it as well, that if I went to Notre Dame, that I would probably leave with a college degree, and that was of the utmost importance at the time, you know, much more so than any dreams or aspirations I had playing in the NFL. But the environment, when I got there, it was about the environment and the people. That's what spoke to me, and that's really what drove my decision.
Well, and it sounds again like you know, we're in a situation that prepared you for the next phase of your life, which was being drafted and going to Green Bay, because there's another institution that kind of fits. I mean, I'm looking at your profile, De La Salle, Notre Dame, Green Bay. I mean, I don't know if you could get a better set of places to play and compete and be surrounded by good people.
Man, you hit that nail on the head. I've often reflected upon that and just how lucky I've been to play football, a sport, at 3 meaningful places that have a lot of history, that have a lot of tradition, that all, you know, very much weave and ingrain values into what it is they do and stand for and believe. And Green Bay was the only NFL team in the league that was built like a college franchise. It's in a town of 100,000. The fans are diehard, win or lose. They're out there to support you, and it's a family environment. I was so lucky to get drafted there, and I was the 16th player taken overall. They traded up, I think, 4 spots from Miami. They were supposed to pick 20th, but when I was available, I think Ron Wolf traded up to get me because they had this hotshot quarterback, Brett Favre, that they wanted some protection for. So it felt good to be wanted. I didn't know much about that franchise. I had a teammate, Jim Flanagan, who whose father ended up playing for the Packers way back in the day. So I had gone home with Jim on a spring break or maybe over Easter and driven through there and got a chance to see the community, ironically enough, the year before I got drafted. So I knew a little bit about it, but it was the Midwest. It was cold. It was football, and I was in, man. Unfortunately, very early on in my career there, day 4 of ever wearing a Green Bay Packer helmet with a G on the side, I ruptured my right patella tendon. And my world came crashing to an end. All of my dreams, all of my goals, all of my aspirations came to a halt. My world stopped. But for them, they moved the drill 10 yards and kept going. They didn't skip a beat. The very next day, they brought in Guy McIntyre, who was a great guard for the San Francisco 49ers for many, many years. And I know that because he was one of my favorite players that I watched playing. So the surrealness of laying on the ground with your patella tendon ruptured and your calf lollipopped because it's not connected all the way up on your femur and just looking grotesque. And then to have a guy that you watched as a kid come in, replace you, and the team not skip a beat, I think it was a harsh reality check that I was insignificant, that my dreams and what I wanted and my role on that team was insignificant. And that was a very, very hard lesson to learn. And I think that set the stage for what my transition would be, which was another very dark, challenging time as well.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, because that's really the next piece in this puzzle is talking about that transition. So what was going through your mind when you came to that realization that, you know, that insignificance, or there's going to have to be more than just this, although this is pretty dang cool, playing in Green Bay and the likes of the teammates that you had. What was going through your mind when that realization hit you?
Well, it was interesting. I ruptured my right patella tendon my rookie year. Came back, played the whole next season, first round of the playoffs, ruptured my left patella tendon. So looking back, I had some structural issues, and that's probably why they both blew, because they were both – I was in the same position and getting bull rushed in a pass protection situation when they went. But with that said, I just lost my ability to be physical. So I gained weight to kind of help stop bull rushes and be a force up there. But it was the law of diminishing returns. The longer I played, the worse I got. Even when I would anticipate what a guy was going to do, I just didn't have physically what it took. So the writing kind of was on the wall for me. So the year that I retired, I knew that was probably going to be the last year that I could play. I was getting my ankle shot up every week from a high ankle sprain after not practicing, taking a Vicodin before the game, a Vicodin at halftime, just to be able to get through, and then walking out on crutches because the lidocaine or Marcaine that they had shot the ankle up had finally worn off, and it was just a disaster. So when I retired, man, I thought it was going to be awesome. I loved to hunt. I loved to fish, and that started out in Green Bay and take trips and travel the world, and I was going to do that. And with all this free time, it was going to be awesome, man. I was 28, single, retired, financially independent, owned a house, had no debt, no kids out of wedlock somehow. I mean, I was the living American dream, and it was the most miserable, dark time of my life. And what I didn't understand then that I know now is that I was having a midlife crisis, that there was a death that had occurred in my life that I wasn't aware of, and that was the death of this athlete, this football player that was the source of my identity, was no longer ever going to be able to walk this planet. And that was a harsh reality that I think sent me into a deep tailspin and depression that I tried to use some negative coping strategies like a lot of guys do. And then it just kind of got worse from there until it got better.
You're listening to the Championship Showcase, Secrets for Success. From the playing field of competition to the field of life, we're speaking with the remarkable Aaron Taylor. And you talked about that death of identity. I mean, Kubler and Ross talk about that, you know, experience of going through that process of grievance, of loss and identity. You turned to some coping mechanisms that weren't favorable and maybe self-destructive a little bit. How did you come out of that?
That was a long process, and I think to maybe describe how I came out of it, it'd be helpful to maybe lay the context of what was going on and why I was there. I had all these things on paper that would lend one to believe that I had made it. I had achieved success. We have commercials and magazine articles and TV shows describing people that were living the life and existence that I had, yet I wasn't happy. And that was a big it created a conflict in me. I checked all these boxes, but I'm still not happy. What's going on there? And what I did is I saw some cracks in the facade of what my life was. I put my fingers in and I ripped them open and started to take a look. And it was interesting what I found. I mean, the bottom line is that football was a vital and necessary means to an end for me, but it wasn't the answer to what was missing from my life. And I had to go and figure out what that was. And I kind of looked at what I later called the 4 pillars of fulfillment that football provided. And that was an income. You know, certainly it provided a very nice income for playing a sport. But it gave me an identity. Hey, aren't you Aaron Taylor? Didn't you win the Super Bowl? Didn't you play at Notre Dame? Didn't you win the Lombardi? I was associated with the game and football without me ever even realizing it. Gave me kind of that circumferential outside validation, if you will. But it also provided a purpose. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning. There was no doubt in my mind every day that I woke up, every day that I played football, what my purpose was, and that was to get better. I was either watching films, lifting weights, running, going to practice, getting treatment, something around the game of football to develop that skill in that aspect. So when I woke up, I had a GPS point to point me in the right direction to do something. I knew what my purpose was, and that was to play the game of football and to do all that I could to get there. But it also, in the last pillar, is that of significance. It made me feel important. I mattered. I made a difference. 70, 80 times a day, whether it's at practice or on the field, I got a pat on the back. Good job, good block, good pull, good punch, good reaction, good call. All of this validation that you had to perform at an extremely high level or I wouldn't have even been there. And that's, is true for everybody. That it gave me validation that I matter. I'm one of 5 offensive linemen that did our job. I'm one of 53 people on an active roster that just won a Super Bowl. I got to feel significant. So when you look at the game of football and you want to understand why it's a death, very analogous to a death, that I think the Kubler-Ross metaphor you presented is extremely spot on, and it's one I've used myself. Is that because I lost the 4 pillars of fulfillment in one fell swoop in a decision where I walked and I had a press conference announcing my retirement. In an instant, my income, my identity, my purpose, and my significance came to a grinding halt, and I was not prepared for that.
Right. Oh, man, that's so powerful. It really is. And we talk about football, but Aaron, this could happen to any athlete in any sport in all realities. Isn't that correct?
Oh, no doubt. It's anybody that goes through a midlife crisis. The thing that we realize that most people do that in their 40s to 50s, or when they retire in their mid-60s. I was doing it at 28. Most people do it earlier than that. But the reality is, and I think what compounds the problem for football players anyway, is that we're extremely conditioned to be short-sighted. We can't even think about next week's game, let alone the next phase of our life, because it's a distraction. Don't think, react. Wear your game face. Never show weakness. All of those things, ironically, that helped us be good football players slice our throats when we get out into the real world.
Right, exactly. So herein lies the question then, understanding the 4 pillars of fulfillment and applying those as an athlete, how did you start applying those outside of athletics and sport in the real world then?
Well, it was interesting. That was the context of kind of what I was going through. And there was a study that's interesting in 2009 that found that 78% of guys that retire in the NFL will be financially stressed, divorced, or partying to excess and abusing drugs and alcohol within 2 years of their careers ending. So think about that, man. 8 out of 10 guys within 2 years are going to be bankrupt, divorced, or chemically dependent. Yeah. So this isn't just an issue that was, specific to me. This is something that all NFL guys go through. And I think if you broaden it out and you look through it, and certainly some of the former professional players of other sports that I know personally, they've gone through the exact same thing. Some of my people in the business community that I'm friends with have gone through the exact same thing. And that's why I think the analogy of it being a midlife crisis is so important. And I think what compounds it for us is when you talk about those 4 pillars, that purpose of waking up in the morning, the challenge is we feel lost. We miss that structure. We miss the camaraderie. We miss the consistency that our sport provided. So we struggle to be able to find out what that was. Luckily, I had gotten to the point where I realized that my drinking was out of control. It was a negative coping strategy. I felt, that I had some swag and was a lot more funny and a lot more handsome to the ladies when I was drinking. So that's what I tried to do, man. I wanted to be a ladies' man out there in the club, hanging out and kicking it.
Right.
And without being, my wife accuses me of TMI too much, but, I would wake up next to a woman who was beautiful, and I would feel empty and lost and shameful. Like, what am I doing? This isn't like I'm checking all these boxes that are supposed to make me happy, but it's not. What's going on there? And what I realized was I had to first, without getting my drinking under control, I had no chance of doing anything else. So I kind of fell into it. It wasn't, that I sat down and wrote out this great plan and executed it, and then here I am. It wasn't that at all.
Right.
It was a process, and I think to help kind of understand that, there was a journey that I went on, if you will. And at first, I think I was blindly optimistic, man. I was like, oh, retirement's going to be great. I'm going to be able to retire. I'm going to go fish and hunt, and it's going to be awesome. And then all of a sudden, it gets to that shock and denial of, oh, man, this isn't quite what I necessarily thought. And then I feel lost. I was okay until the first regular season game happened. And when I realized I wasn't part of it then, that's when it really hit me the hardest. So most athletes retire after the season of play, and it's not until the next season starts that it really starts to get hard because you realize it's over. So then I was kind of confused and pissed at my body for failing me and the injuries, and maybe I can make a comeback, but at the same time I was feeling relieved. And I think 2 years out, right on time according to the data, is when I kind of hit rock bottom. And I had to figure out what it is I wanted to do next. And that process involved, for me, getting sober. And part of that was cleaning up the records from my past. Part of that was humility and admitting that I had an issue. And football, coming from that culture, is about being tough, about being strong. This process was asking me to admit that I was powerless. Are you kidding me? That's not my vocabulary. Powerless?
Right. What
are you talking about? So it was a long process for me to realize how much strength and courage it took to admit that people that wear their game face, that don't have a willingness or an ability to be able to embrace reality, even if that means you're feeling sad or left out or not good enough or not a part of some of those things that are taboo in the locker room. You never walked in the locker room and been like, hey, Favre, man, you know what? I'm feeling really left out and lonely because I ruptured my patellar tendon. Can we talk about that?
Right.
It just doesn't happen. So what happens in the real world, man, is we suffer in silence. We isolate. Yes. We don't want people to see us in this state. So we lose track of our teammates. We lose track with our friends. And we pick different playgrounds. We pick different playmates other than the ones we, played with our sport, because we're embarrassed and we're ashamed. So the first thing I did was get sober. And that made a significant difference. And when I looked at football, I think a lot of people, that Simon Sinek concept of, what's your why? I think a lot of people focused on the what, some focused on the how. But I had to figure out why I mattered, why I got up in the morning, what is it that I'm choosing to do? And I went back and I looked at some of the things, and there's football and professional sports and sports in general, I think, again, provide things that we're unaware of. We measure how well we do in wins or losses or records or times or home runs, whatever. But there are these intangible things that are so meaningful that are underneath why those achievements of numbers and stuff are so important. And again, it goes to, some of what those pillars were that we discussed. But when you look at a person's profession, right, there's what you're good at, what you like, and what the market will pay you for. Well, football and professional sports is the blending of those. It's this perfect bullseye of something you're good at, something that you like to do, and something that the market will compensate you significantly for. What most people do is they're good at something and the market pays them for it, but they're not happy with it. If you're good at it and you like it, but there's no market value, then that's a hobby, and so on and so forth. So the sweet spot there is finding something in the middle, and it's virtually impossible to replicate what we got in sports. So I think when people look for that next profession, they make the misunderstanding that if I played this sport and did this for work and felt great, now that I'm not doing it, I need to replace that job with another job that's going to make me feel the same way, and it's just not possible. You have to deconstruct it and replace the elements of what that job provided for you. And again, it goes back to those pillars. It speaks to your why. And a really quick example from my own life, what I do in television provides an income. It certainly gives me a little bit of an identity, but it certainly does not address whatsoever my purpose or my significance. Maybe significance a little bit, but that purpose piece, not at all. God didn't put me on this planet to be a college football analyst, so I had to go outside of that. So part of the things I've done is exactly what I'm doing here, sharing my story, helping other guys kind of take their own journey, helping them navigate. What hurts us as athletes is we don't know what we don't know. So you can arm people with information just like you're doing, Dominic, in a beautiful way, by the way. You can arm people with information so that they know what to expect. We're giving them a scouting report so that when life throws them curveballs, they're expecting it, and they can choke down on the bat and, do whatever other baseball metaphor that I'm probably going to get off the rails and get wrong, so I'll stop. But whatever it is, man, giving people the information. And what they do with that is up to them. But I think the things that we're discussing, there's a huge need for it because we don't know what we don't know. Doesn't mean that that's going to, help people be successful, but it'll certainly help them navigate it if that's what they want to do.
Absolutely. Aaron, the stuff you're talking about, I mean, I hear my story coming out from your story because the stuff that you went through, I went through, and I think thousands of other athletes have gone through almost exactly the same process and experiences, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. We're just about out of time, and like I said, I could talk to you for forever about this. And one thing I want to say, one thing I mentioned before in another interview is that we're trying to get this information out to athletes prior to them having to go through this experience, because it's kind of like for me having a baby. And I had talked about the story before, right, where you get the baby's crib ready, you get the clothes ready, you get the in-laws ready to help you out and all that. But when that baby gets here, you had no idea what that experience is like until you go through it. And so some of that, I think athletes have to go through it a little bit, but they don't necessarily have to go. It took me 20 years to get through that entire process that you're talking about. And if athletes are willing to be open and to listen to the experiences of guys like you and myself and others that have been through it, maybe they won't take so long to go through it and get the message sooner.
I agree with you there, Dominic, and it's certainly what's needed. You can't get this information to people early enough. The challenge is for athletes to embrace this.
Right.
It forces them to acknowledge their vulnerability and the inevitability that they're no longer going to do what they're going to do. My experience was that the athletes that had another life outside of football significantly outperformed those of us that had all of our eggs in one basket. Married guys typically did better than non-married guys. Guys that had businesses or interests outside of football that they did in the off season typically transitioned better and more quickly than those of us that didn't. So to your point, it's about getting this information to people in a way that they can digest so that when they have the baby, they think at some point, oh, this is what Dominic was talking about. Oh, yes. Man, this is what they were talking about, because it's no different than what we did with our parents. Think about it that way. Our parents didn't know anything. Then all of a sudden we become parents and we go, oh, 20, 30 years later. And I tell you this much, man, I've called my mom 10 or 15 times literally saying, oh, my God, thank you so much for everything you did. I had no idea. And she just laughs and laughs and laughs because I didn't know what I didn't know. But what you're doing here is trying to arm people with information and do it in a way that is digestible, in a way that can be impactful when they need it. It's like reading a book on how to swim. If you just jumped in the pool and try to save yourself from sinking to the bottom, that's not going to work. You jump in the pool after reading a book on how to swim, it's still going to be a struggle, but you got a chance to get yourself the doggy paddle to the side. So it's still going to be rough in all cases for the most part, but it can be smoother and a quicker transition if people have the information so that they know what to expect. So when it shows up, they can have a plan on how to react. That's the model and metaphor we did as athletes. You got a scouting report. You had expectations about what the opponent was doing, but guess what? It was a little different, or it was more, or it was less. You're going to have to audible halfway through the process, but if you don't have a good game plan in place on what you reasonably can expect, you're going to be all over the place because you're going to be chasing your tail. So this is a great way that you're doing to present information to people in a way that they're going to be able to relate to and that they've already experienced. And I think that that was the thing that in the work that I've done with former athletes is to remind them, hey, man, you've been here before. You've had adversity before. You were a freshman that got brought up to varsity and got your tail kicked. You were a hotshot high school athlete that was a freshman on campus playing against grown men getting your tail worked. You were a lineman like myself that got to Green Bay and gave up more sacks and pressures in a minicamp than I did in 4 years in college against guys that didn't even make the roster. You're going to be here and get struggled and get tested, but do you have a plan? Do you trust that plan? Do you execute that plan? If you do, the harder you work, the better you'll get, and you'll eventually get the results you want.
Well, I was going to finish up with your 3 pieces of wisdom for those going through the process, but I think you just gave it to us, right? So you have the 4 pillars of success or fulfillment: income, identity, purpose, and significance, and then having a plan, trusting the plan, and execute the plan. We certainly hope you've enjoyed our conversation with the incredible Aaron Taylor, everybody. I know I have. You've been listening to the Championship Showcase, Secrets for Success, from the playing field of competition to the field of life. Aaron, we really appreciate your time, your insights, your thoughts, your sharing your experiences. Before we officially sign off, any last thoughts for our audience?
Well, your question cut out there a little bit. What I'll say is the last thing that I'll leave you with is just understand that it's a process and that you're capable of becoming who it is you want to be and what it is you're capable of doing, that we're all going to be ex-athletes a heck of a lot longer than we're ever going to be professional athletes. It's just about figuring out what's inside of us, what our purpose is beyond sport. And if you think about the skills that sports gave us about being leaders, about making decisions, how to deal with adversity, about accountability, there are still ways that the world very much needs us to be impactful, and we can use what we learned in sports to go out and do that. And I would encourage everybody to find ways to be of service, to use the skills that they did so that they can have that feeling of significance and purpose that may be related to the sports. And I'm not just talking about being a coach, but maybe coaching people in their lives, whatever it is, that everything that we've done and gone through has given us value, and that value becomes a tool. And then the question merely is, how do I use the tools that I have in my toolbox to go build something beautiful? Just trust that it's available, trust that it's possible, and the world is waiting on you to go use what you've been given to make it better.
Wow, sounds like you've come a long way, Aaron. We really appreciate it. We want to thank you once again for joining us, and we encourage those of you who feel you might need some assistance through your career transition, please reach out, get the necessary help you need. You have purpose and you have value. For Aaron Taylor, this is Dominic Militello. For now, we want to wish you all the best always. We'll catch you next time.